I am so excited to introduce my friend and colleague, Rachel Anderson. We were just talking tonight that Rachel and I have known each other over 10 years. She is a wonderful naturalist. She's a wonderful teacher and a great friend and someone that's so exciting to explore the pond with. So Rachel, please.
Thank you, Heather, so much. That was really a wonderful introduction. So again, I'm Rachel Anderson, a naturalist here at Warner Park Nature Center, and I am absolutely in love with newts. So thank you guys for some of your observations and questions that you put into the chat. And so if I can make my computer function, we'll be good to go. Here we go. So I'm actually starting off with this picture, and I think my friend is on this webinar right now. And she sent me this image of a newt, and that's what we're going to be exploring today. And this was actually, she found this early this spring as she was digging around in her garden, and thought maybe it was actually dead, but it came back when she put it out in the sunshine. And they're just fascinating, and they're all over the place. So they're really a great little creature to study. So we're going to look today at what a newt actually is, look closely at its really unique life cycle, and then focus on some of their really fascinating breeding behaviors. But like Heather said, anytime you have a question, please put that in the Q&A or put that in the chat, and I'm happy to pause and answer the question for you. So we're going to start with what a newt actually is. So newts are salamanders. So a lot of people think, and I hear this all the time at the pond here at Warner Park, they think that they're lizards. And I thought it was kind of interesting that their name actually has lizard-like roots. The etymology is that it's a legendary lizard-like creature that can live in fire, which I think is kind of fun for the word salamander, but they're not. These are amphibians like frogs. And you can kind of see here on the pictures that their skin is very porous. You know, they don't have scales like snakes and lizards do. They're not reptiles. They are amphibians. And we have a lot of different species of salamanders here in Warner Park. This first one on the left is a zigzag salamander. And then one in the middle is a two-lined salamander. And then we've got a little dusky salamander on the far right. So newts are salamanders, but they're a little different from salamanders. And what I'd like to do, and I won't ask you to do a whole lot in the chat, but right now I'd like for you to look at these two pictures and type in the chat for me any differences that you notice between these two. So on the top left is that dusky salamander, and on the bottom is the eastern newt. So if anybody wants to share something that they notice that's different between these two salamanders, that would be awesome. Put in the chat, and I'll give you guys a second to do that. You guys didn't know it was an interactive one, did you? So yeah, I've got a few things coming in. Thank you guys. So I'm going to pull up my laser pointer here. Yeah, so the skin is very different on these two. So this one down here on the bottom has really rough, bumpy looking skin. And this one up here is really smooth. So newts are really different in that they have that rough skin, at least in their F stage. The other thing that's really different, yes, thanks guys, I see those comments, the smooth lines and slits. Yeah, so these little lines right here on the sides, most of the salamanders that you're going to encounter in Tennessee have these little slits right here. They're not really slits, they're grooves. They're called coastal grooves. And that allows the salamanders to absorb more oxygen through their skin. But the eft does not have that. So that's just a couple of the differences between newts and salamanders, but they are salamanders. Right. So there are more than 50 species of newts worldwide, but there's only 7 that occur in the United States. And here's a brief sampling of newts from across the United States that you can find. But only one of these species lives in Tennessee, and it actually has a pretty broad range all along the eastern coast. And it's the red-spotted or eastern newt. And I think the red-spotted really does seem obvious. That's why it's called red-spotted. It's got these awesome little red spots all over it. And I'll use the name eastern newt and red-spotted newt interchangeably tonight as we go through the webinar. All right, so everybody knows what a newt is now. So now we're going to take a look at their life cycle. which I think is just absolutely fascinating. So they have red-spotted newts have one of the most complex life cycles of any North American salamander. And for the most part, they have 4 distinct stages. You've got your egg, and then you have your larval form. The weird one comes in with the F form, and then you have your adult. And so we're going to actually take a look at all 4 of these stages right now in closer detail. I'm going to pause, make sure there's no questions. All right. So first off, this is not an egg of an eastern newt. These are actually 2-line salamander eggs. And so a lot of salamanders will lay their eggs all together in a clump, like this 2-line salamander. And she'll actually even guard her eggs until they hatch. And these are 2 salamander eggs that we found in our creek here at the Nature Center.
Hey, Rachel, how do you know those are 2-lined salamander eggs?
Because she was guarding the eggs when we lifted the rock. So she was actually guarding her eggs when we lifted the rock and found these. It's a great question. It was a fun day. So red-spotted newts, of course, don't do that because they're totally different. So this is a female red-spotted newt, and they lay their eggs one at a time, and they hide them in vegetation. They might be wrapped in leaves. So they're really impossible to find. And I have searched all over trying to find an egg picture for you guys. Could not find any eggs in the pond. They're in there, I know they are, but I couldn't find them. They really wrap them up well. And you can see in our pond, there's just all kinds of leaf debris where they could be hiding these eggs. And what's fun though, is that they spread them out. So single eggs laid all over the pond, and it'll take them a couple of weeks to lay all of those eggs. And it can be up to 200 or even 300 eggs, which is pretty cool. There's another one moving around. I tried again to capture one actually laying an egg. Apparently they squeeze their back legs on a piece of vegetation and the egg pops out of the vent. But I didn't get a video of that, sorry. So most of these guys are laying their eggs probably in our pond between about February and April. And then when the eggs hatch, we get these little larval forms. This is the second stage. And they're pretty small. So you know you're going to have a larval red-spotted newt if you look for the external gills. So I've got my laser pointer here, and you can see these kind of feathery structures outside the back of the cheek right there. And those external gills show you that it's a larval. And how long does it take the eggs to hatch? That's a great question. It takes them about 3 to 5 weeks to hatch. So this one right here is actually one that we caught in the pond in June. So it's actually fairly advanced in its life. And you can also see as they get older, they get this line, this nice dark line that goes between right through the eye right there. So it's another way to identify the red-spotted newt larval. But they don't get very big. So I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with the life cycle of dragonflies, but the larval dragonfly also lives in the pond, and they don't get very big. They're just, you know, maybe 7 to 9 millimeters in length. And so this little dragonfly down here on the bottom gives you an idea of how small this larval salamander is. They're really tiny. And they'll stay in the pond at this stage maybe 2 to 5 months. And then they transform into my favorite stage, which is the F. So this little guy is one that we found in walking around right outside the pond under the picnic tables. So they lay their eggs February to April. They hatch 3 to 5 weeks later and start to grow and live for about 2 to 3 months. So by the fall, that makes sense, we'd start seeing the little F forms walking around at the pond. And so this one probably had just transformed because he's so super tiny and adorable. So he probably just went from that larval stage to the terrestrial F stage. And so in this stage, they will walk around completely terrestrial. They don't go to the ponds or anything like that. And they'll walk around this stage for about 2 to 3 years, getting a little bit bigger and bigger. They're going to be eating just about anything they can find. They're opportunistic feeders. So they love to hang around the decaying logs. They love to hang around stumps where they're trying to find insects and things like that. And so you might be wondering, and you probably have noticed, that they really are a bright red color. And so you might wonder why they're so brightly colored. Well, so the warning, that's supposed to be a warning sign. And in fact, these little guys have very effective neurotoxins in their skin. So it just makes them completely unpalatable to most predators. And so because they're so toxic, they can avoid being attacked by predators who have learned to associate that red color with the bad taste. Yeah, it's a very effective neurotoxin, which I think is really cool. What's fun though, just on a side note, there are other salamanders out there that are also red. This is a big northern red salamander that lives in a log at my yard, and he's not toxic at all. So they must be mimicking the newts maybe to avoid predation, which I think is really fun. So Kim is asking a good question. So back to the newts. So since they have this lovely neurotoxin, you might think, I better not touch it, but it's okay. You can touch it, just don't eat it. So that would be your best bet. And they really are toxic in all three of their main stages, the larval stage, the F stage, and the adult stage. They're toxic in all three of those stages. The F stage, the really bright red stage, is the stage where they have the most neurotoxin in their skin, which is kind of cool. So, and then after the F stage, so they, like I said, might be in the F stage, wandering around completely terrestrial for 2 to 3 years. And then finally, they'll either return to their original pond, or they might, move to a different pond or a different breeding area where they will transform and metamorphosize back into an aquatic form, which is the adult. But you'll notice on this one, the adults do not have the external gills. You can see that on here. So I'm going to show you a little video. Just watch this video and see what this little guy does. This is the aquatic adult. And I hope you guys saw that. He took a little breath of air. So the adults do have lungs when they go back into the pond, but they can stay underwater for a long time. So that's the typical life cycle. And so you think that's pretty cool. That's pretty neat. It's different from most other salamanders that just have 3 stages to their life cycle. We've got this extra F stage. But what's really odd is that they don't always follow this 1, 2, 3, 4 stage. So this juvenile down here, depending on the environmental conditions, this juvenile down here might completely skip the F stage and turn into an adult and mature as an adult and still have the external gills, but it can reproduce. It's called neotenic. So that could happen. Or the salamander might stay in the F stage and never become a full adult, but still be able to go into a breeding pond and breed and lay eggs. So they're really bizarre. They can do all sorts of things. I have never seen anything other than these 4 stages. But my understanding is, depending on environmental conditions, they could do a whole bunch of different things, which I think is pretty cool. So let's look at the adult stage a little more closely. This is where you get a lot of really fun, interesting behaviors. I love the Fs. They're probably my favorite stage, but still the adult stage is pretty cool. So one of the first things that's really neat about the adults, this means you got to get back on the chat again, so sorry about that. But I would love for you guys to take a look and see if you can notice some of the differences between the adults, between the salamander on the top and the salamander on the bottom. So what are some of the differences? And we've got questions asking how long they actually live for. That's a great question. They can live a long time, depending on how much, depending on how many kids are at the pond, really. But they can live a long time. I'm not sure. I think easily 10 years. I think it was 10 to 15 years are some of the oldest for these guys. So what are some of the, thank you for the questions. So what are some of the things that you guys notice between the salamander on the top and the salamander on the bottom? Again, these are both adult eastern red newts in their aquatic form. Thank you guys for putting stuff into the chat. So yeah, this one on the top looks a lot darker. And this one's a little bit lighter. It's more easy to see the pattern on here. And I love that description, the tail has a flat thing. Yeah, that tail is really flattened out, right, on this top one. We call that keeled tail because it helps it swim through the water. So we've got this nice keeled tail on the top one right here, and this is a more streamlined tail on the bottom. It's very rounded. And then you might not be able to see, but the toes on this one have these little black spots. So I'm going to show another picture so you can see that a little bit better. So the top one is a male, and the bottom one is a female. And so the males, the main thing you notice, I'll show you guys this picture, is the males, when you pick one up in the pond this time of year, have these lovely black ridges all along their legs, and then the cornified black toe tips. So we'll talk about what those are here in a minute. And then they also have this really enlarged cloaca or vent. I'll use both of those terms to describe what's going on. And so we'll talk about that as well. So when you go back to the picture before, you can see that the female down here on the bottom does not have those toes and doesn't have the swollen cloaca like the male does. So it's really great when you go in the pond. And it seems like every time I'm in the pond looking at these salamanders, there's way more males than the females. I don't know if that's actually just because those are the ones that are closest to where the kids can catch them or not, but it always seems like there's more males than the females. So what we're going to do is that we're going to actually look at what the males do in the pond. So here's a picture. I hope you guys can see the male hiding in all the algae that's in the pond. And so what they're doing right now is they're patrolling the pond, searching for females, which can be kind of hard to do in all this algae. Sorry, trying to make my thing move. And they're extremely curious. Right now, every time I put my aquatic camera in the pond, they come right up to investigate. They're very curious little salamanders. And so they keep looking around in all the ponds. It's another good look at the back legs of the male as he's patrolling the pond, searching for a female. And here he has found a female, which is pretty fun. And she's not interested, so he latches on. I hear this all the time when I'm at the pond. Kids are asking me why there are two salamanders stuck together. And this is actually the beginning of their courtship behavior. So when the male finds the female, especially if she's not particularly interested, he latches on with those back legs. And so those cornified black pads under his leg really help him hold on to this super slippery salamander. And then he starts moving his tail back and forth. Let me get my thing to function properly here, sorry. And he starts rubbing his head. So I'm just going to show you guys this little video. So he starts moving his tail back and forth across her body and then rubbing his head onto her head. And we're going to play this so you guys can see it. And so he's wafting his scent towards her face. So that's really how salamanders communicate. It's all about pheromones and smelling and scent. And so he is wafting the scent from his cloaca to her face, trying to get her interested in him. So this is all part of that courtship dance. So here he is. I watched this pair for about 2 hours. So they can stay underwater for a long time. And courtship really intensifies right at the end. And you can see him wafting his tail, wiggling his tail back and forth. He's actually jerking her around. You can see him rubbing his face up on her chin there, just a little bit. It's really quite fascinating. And so as he's doing that, let's do this bit right here. So he gets really intense. He's rubbing his head, rubbing his body, and then he takes a step right off. I'm going to pause the video right here for a second. So what's supposed to happen is he moves in front of her and he starts to do this really great body undulation. He's undulating his tail. He's really showing off. And he's supposed to be dropping a spermatophore. And so the spermatophore is what actually holds the sperm that she's going to be able to use to fertilize her eggs. And so if he drops that, I was getting excited because I couldn't wait to see this. I've never seen a spermatophore before. So he's going to drop the spermatophore, and then she just climbs over the top of it and then just sucks it up in her vent. And then that's how she is able to fertilize her eggs. So I'm super excited about this. So I'm going to show you guys what happened. There he is. I'm waiting for him to drop that spermatophore. And she deserts him. I couldn't believe it. I stayed on them for another 5 minutes waiting for her to come back. And it never happened. So he just sits there waving his body around and his tail around and nothing happened. So I had to look it up. I was so surprised that the courtship did not actually end in fertilization. There he is again. And he's just so cool looking. And I really thought, I was sure he was going to drop it. So apparently only 6% of courtship bouts are successful. So most of the time, 61% of the time, the females desert the males right after he lets her go. And they were underwater for 2 hours. And there was a question that, are they breathing cutaneously when they stay underwater that long? Yes. So they are often breathing through their skin just a little bit while they're doing that. That's how they can stay that long. But she, so most of the time she deserts him. And it's probably because she's already got fertilized eggs. So if you think about it, the pond is pretty small. It seems like there's more males than females when I look in there. So they're probably already finished. And she already has her fertilized eggs. But the other reason, if I can make my computer go ahead, there we go, is this one is the second male that came up right after she deserted him. And so a third of the time, they actually get interrupted. And so this male is trying to get, the second male is trying to get the first male to drop his spermatophore. He doesn't do it. I still wish he'd done it. But the males often interfere. And so maybe they're trying to get him to drop that spermatophore so that he has to use energy to recreate a new packet or not. And then eventually these guys just all spread out across the pond and the courtship was over. But it was just really fascinating to see that behavior right there in the pond. And they're out there doing this all the time, every day. It's really pretty cool. And in the chat, yeah, she looks like she's full of eggs. Yeah, I don't know if they know if the female is already ready when they grab the females. That's a great question. It seems like they should be able to sense a little bit, but you know, the males are just really active and they're just really trying to breed. And nothing I've read in the literature suggests that they know whether or not the female is already laid eggs or has already been fertilized. So great question. So here they are post activity. So I'm just always so surprised. Every time I start studying the newts and start looking at them again, I learn something else new. And it's really amazing what you can observe just in this one little area. And again, these are, somebody had asked earlier if, you know, where to find newts. You know, any pond or area of still water, you're usually going to find newts. And newts have really benefited a lot along the eastern United States because we have a lot of times where we build artificial ponds, and they really do seem to find those and use those. And so their population has really increased. And the pond is actually, yeah, the pond is on the Nature Center campus. So Heather can put in our address if you'd like to come see these guys. They're all over the place right now. So it's a great place to come watch them. And let's see. So, I've been learning more and more about these, and I kind of thought that once they became aquatic adults, they would just stay in the pond all the time. But this winter, or early spring, one of our staff, when it was pouring down rain, which is why this picture is a little blurry, they were out moving around and they weren't in the pond. So, why were they out moving around? Were they trying to get parasites off their body? Were they hunting for food? Were they actually trying to move from one pond to another, maybe because of competition? I don't actually know. So it's really, there's still a whole lot more questions I have about these awesome salamanders. But what I do know is that in our pond, at least, they stay here year round. Some other populations might leave and overwinter on land, apparently, but ours stay in the pond all year. This is Newt that I videoed. Sorry, it's a little blinky. One winter this January, and they are active and moving. And actually, the very next day, I came back out to the pond and saw these newts mating. So they'll even start mating in January when the pond is still frozen over. So they are pretty active and hardy salamanders. And in fact, they're so hardy, like I said, they can withstand kids pulling them out of the pond over and over and over again. We often see scenes like this. You guys can see just how many red-spotted newts are in this container, mixed in with a whole bunch of tadpoles and other things like that. So they could really handle just about anything. And because they're toxic, there aren't very many things that will eat them. Although I did watch a couple of years ago a great blue heron devour an eastern newt from our pond, and he sat there and chomped on it with his beak, and then like washed it in the water, and then chomped on it in his beak a little bit more, and then washed it on the water. And I was wondering if he was trying to like wash out that toxin to get it to keep excreting the toxin and then wash it off. And finally, it swallowed the newt, but I swear it looked a little sick after it had done it. So, of course, I didn't have my camera at the time, so I don't have a picture of that right now. But it's just amazing all the different things that these salamanders can do. And so I am going to answer a few more questions if you guys have. I mean, I didn't cover everything. There's so much more about these salamanders, but I tried to focus on ones that I actually have pictures for and videos for. Environmental stressors that would keep a newt in its F stage or skip straight to adults. Yeah, so definitely if you've got ponds drying up, so droughts can cause that. And it seems to happen a lot in more coastal areas and sandy areas where those things tend to happen. So, or, maybe if it's overcrowdedness, I mean, there's going to be a lot of competition, right, between all these different organisms in the pond. So maybe it's because of competition for that as well. So thank you for that question as well. So I'm going to see if you guys have any other questions about the newts, and I really appreciate you guys coming out, and I really hope you come out to the pond and check it out. I know some of you don't live near here, you're from around, but they really are all across the eastern United States, and I've found that the F stage is really easy to spot in the fall. They seem to really be moving around and migrating at that time, but right now it's the time to be looking at still ponds and see if you can find any there. Do we have any other questions?
I think Haley's last question about environmental stressors was our last question.
All right, cool.
Oh,
yeah, that's a good question. So Kim's asking if she's heard that they're as voracious as bullfrogs and impact the pond community. So, what's interesting is that I've read that they could, a lot of people think that they impact it negatively, but I've also read that they can be a positive influence as a top predator in the pond ecosystem. And so, they can actually help balance out some of the populations of other predators in there, like the bullfrog. And one thing that popped in my head, they're known to eat just about anything, including leeches. And I've been thinking about how many leeches we have in the pond that are on the turtles that we find. and wondering whether or not they have an impact on that population. So it's something that actually needs to be more fully studied about whether or not they're more of a keystone predator species or if they are really detrimental to a pond ecosystem. So great question, and not one that I can easily answer. That just means we'd have to do more studies at the pond, which would be fun.
Well, I really want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. This has been just a fantastic. This is the third time that I always see these presentations over and over before you guys see them. And I learned something new every single time. But Rachel, thank you again. Thank you to Friends of Warner Parks for providing this Zoom platform, and to Metro Parks and Warner Park Nature Center. I hope to see you soon at the pond.